What is there to say about the Scout that hasn't been said before? He's fast, obnoxious, powerful, and basically, kind of a big deal. Arguably the most basic out of all the 9 classes in TF2, but being basic still brings results, as a Scout is universally agreed to be one of the best classes in the game, but also one of the hardest classes to master. Despite that, mastery of this class is what I sought out, as I decided to embark on a challenge to play nothing but the Scout for 30 days. Not only that, but the Scout has a large variety of weapons I want to test out and see what's good and what's not, so I would give every weapon a good shot before moving on to the next, with prior weapons typically being tested for 3 days before coming to a conclusion. That's another thing, this challenge will be divided into 3-day segments, with 10 in total, as I felt this was an appropriate amount of time to come to certain conclusions while still not dragging on for too long. Alright, that's enough preamble, let's move to past me. Before we start with any of the typical stuff with the challenge, let's just cover the Scout in general. The fundamental design of the Scout is it does everything faster. He kills faster with a deceptively strong scatter gun, because giving a shotgun 15 more maximum damage can make all the difference. Soldiers die in 2 hits instead of 3, heavies die in 3 hits instead of 4, and well, it's just overall good to have more damage. And if you have good aim, you just delete everyone that's close to you, and anyone left still living gets cleaned up by the pistol. But not only does he kill fast, he can move fast, so if you had plans of running away, I've got bad news for you. This also means he runs away fast, so you can't do the same to him. You can move to health quicker as well, giving him deceptively good sustain. And don't forget, targets that move faster are also harder to hit, so landing blows on them is going to be more difficult in the first place. And as if those 2 traits weren't good enough, he also gets 2 amazing passive abilities that on their own blow any other passive in the game out of the water. The flashier of the 2 is his double jump, which allows him to not only get to higher ledges for free, but also redirect his air movement so he's even harder to hit. It's crazy strong on its own, but even stronger when given to the fastest class in the game. His other passive that's just as strong but doesn't get the same amount of clout as a double jump is his 2 times cap speed, allowing him to win the game faster than any other class. Once again, this is made even better by the fact that it's attached to a class and can get to the objective faster than any other class. However, the Scout is not completely broken, as he does have 2 major factors holding him back. One, he's incredibly fragile. The Scout is typed for the lowest health in the game at 125, and therefore can easily get cleaned if you're not careful, meaning that not only you're going to have to shoot good, not just move good, but do both at the same time, and it can be tricky at times to move in those erratic ways possible while making sure your crosshair stays on the enemy gamer. The second weakness he has is his lack of range, as both of his weapons have aggressive damage, fall off, and spread, meaning you're really going to want to get into your opponent's face. These are serious issues, but how much would they stop me from getting success at Scout? Well, as it turns out, not that much. In these starting days of the challenge, I managed to do pretty well. If your aim is true and your moves smooth, success will naturally follow. It's a matter of practice. I'd also like to thank some of the Max in these clips for pocketing me, which by the way, please heal Scouts. You'll gain extra movement speed, and the Scout's biggest weakness removed becomes downright oppressive sometimes. Other than that, nothing much to say here, so let's talk about the tools I used on the first 3 days. First, we have the stock scatter gun, which we already covered. So let's get to the less mentioned but still strong stock weapon, the pistol. It's a nice one to use when finishing off opponents or dealing chip damage at mid-range before going in for the kill. And it's nice that there's an unguarded sentry round. If nobody's gonna kill a sentry, you gotta do something. Overall, pretty nice. And then later switch to a bonk for a bit, which I immediately missed my pistol after switching to it. Not to say it didn't have its uses, as it's basically a budget dead ringer. We're gonna turn around a corner, drink it, and escape from certain death. Which is of course the typical use of getting behind enemy lines, however, you need to have a good plan if you want to live more than 3 seconds after invincibility runs out, otherwise, you're just gonna get turned into a clip. Overall, it can be powerful, but it's just situational, you'd much rather have a pistol and a few easy escapes. Last but not least, our melee. Since the stock melee for Scout is so uninteresting and subpar, I chose to go with the Boston Basher to start out. It has two simple stats. You do extra bleed damage on hit, and you hit yourself when you miss. High risk, high reward. However, there's a hidden benefit to this damage on hit, and I'm not talking about building uber faster like we're playing in competitive. No. I'm talking about hitting yourself to get to higher places, as every hit comes with some knockback. You can use this knockback to get to places that absolutely no one expects you to go. However, it still costs health, so be careful on how you use it. And that's all I have to say about the first 3 days of this challenge. But I do want a bit of change for our weapons, as we can't just go with the same old scattergun for the whole challenge. So let's just see what the next 3 days have in store for us. To start out with this new chapter of the challenge, I go for a complete loadout switch. Instead of going with the typical scattergun, I decide to opt to go for the Force of Nature, which is a bit of a divisive weapon. Some people think it's a fun alternative to the stock scattergun, and others think it belongs in a dumpster. What do I think after 3 days of playing with it? Well, it's quite underrated. While a lot of people complain about the knockback and how supposedly it makes the weapon worthless, I think these people just aren't doing it right. You don't aim the same direction after knocking someone, you have to follow up that initial shot by aiming a bit upwards, and you get a nice 1-2 combo. There's also sticking people up to walls, so the second shot is all but guaranteed. I mean, the knockback is still a nice boon in combat. But you all know why fans of the Force of Nature really love this weapon. Never gets old. There's also force jumping to consider, making the Scout an even more predictable and movable threat than he was before. Verdict? This is a genuinely viable alternative to scattergun. Don't listen to the naysayers. I mean, yes, it does suffer against groups sometimes, and sometimes you get stuck in a long reload, but other than that, no singular class can really stop. Yeah, we had to talk about this at some point. Engineer hard counter scout, as in, please team, destroy the sentry so we can actually go into this area. Because who knew something that makes damage ramp up and movement speed irrelevant would be incredibly tough to deal with as scout. That being said, engineer isn't always impossible to deal with. If you pay attention, play your cards right, and land your shots, you can take down the engineer and lead the sentry for the rest of the team to kill. After all, everyone's got a plan until they get shot in the head. That being said, those scenarios are uncommon and shouldn't be relied on all the time. Just be patient. Sometimes very patient, depending on the competence of your medics, explosive classes, or spies. Anyways, back to the weapons I used. Since the Force of Nature could still knock that opponent out of range, I opted to go for the classic Flying Guillotine and Wrap Assassin combo. The Flying Guillotine is a throwing knife, or rather, a cleaver which deals 50 contact damage and bleed. It's useless against sentries, but it's a very nice way to start up a fight or clean up a kill. Also, hitting someone knocked away by the Force of Nature with the guillotine is incredibly satisfying. But if you're not a fan of precise plays and more to spam, get faster recharges for hitting people further away. Overall, if you're a projectile enjoyer like me, try this out, it may surprise you. As for the melee I paired it with, the Wrap Assassin is pretty weak with regular melee damage, but a great boon when considering it has an ultimate fire that shoots a ball that does bleed damage. Basically, get more bleed along with your other bleed projectile, meaning that if you stick both on the light class, they will die unless they grab a health pack. Not much else to say about this that I already said about the guillotine. Great weapon. Now let's talk about the other two weapons I used. First, the Criticola. It's really lame. It encourages you to play lame with the penalty of being marked for death and the fact that your shots have no damage fall off. It tells you into an ambush playstyle. There's nothing really funny or interesting about it. Actually, there is something that's funny or interesting. Knockback. You see, knockback is skimmed with damage. If you give a weapon that already does a lot of damage and knockback more damage, well, this happens. It's a bit funny, but you should probably use it if you hate other people and yourself, or if you think the knockback is worth it to cause all the suffering. But if you only hate yourself, I think the Sandman would be a perfect fit for you, and a horrible fit for anyone trying to get stuff done. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. You'd be better off with having no melee than having this chip on your shoulder equipped. The baseball is a strictly worse projectile than the ornament as it has no bleed and the slowdown might as well not exist. But the worst part is its downside. Minus 15 health. This sounds minor, but upon playing the game, this downside is crippling sometimes. For one, direct rockets that'll kill you in one hit. In any previous scenario where you'd live at 10 or lower health is now gone. Playing aggressively is now much more of a gamble, as it's harder to kill and easier to die. In other words, don't use this weapon. With that set of good and bad weapons, it's time for another change. This time, we're going with a special loadout made to be together. The Special Delivery. The Special Delivery set consists of 3 items. The Shortstop, Mad Milk, and the Holy Mackerel. We're starting the Shortstop first, as I got a lot of experience using it. In my verdict, it's not good. Don't get me wrong, it has some nice redeeming qualities, like the increased range, fast fire speed allowing you to delete players sometimes, and in fact it is the best scout priority to fight sentries. However, everything else induces great pain. The overall damage is mediocre due to max damage being significantly lower than any other scout primary. The 4 bullets never hit to the DPS, and the reload speed is painful. Not only is it incredibly long, but you have to wait for the whole animation to play to get your bullets back. I mean, if you swap weapons a millisecond too early, get ready for it to play again. And don't even get me started on the shove. Not only is it almost pointless, not only is it unrewarding for how close you have to be to do it, but even if you wanted to use it, you can't do it with a long, painful reload. Meaning if you're going to use it in the middle of combat, you better do it the microsecond after you shoot or it gets cancelled. Is it the worst scout parry? No, but it is absolutely frustrating and generally not worth it. However, if you're still going to stick with this thing, I suggest pacing your shots. Despite the rapid fire nature of this weapon, you should only really go full auto on buildings or targets that you're absolutely sure you'll hit. This doesn't make it a good option, but hey, you might be able to get a good number of kills. Thankfully, the subpar scatter gun comes with an amazing secondary in the form of the Mad Milk. It's an incredibly useful utility item that comes in handy in all types of situations. Need to win the 1v1, Mad Milk so you heal and hit. Need to win a team fight, Milk everyone at a point. Need to catch a spy, Milk comes so he doesn't get away. Need to extinguish yourself for a friend, Milk's got you covered. Someone suffering from calcium deficiency? Probably not happening, but hey, Milk still helps with that. It's probably still less useful with the Shortstop due to the lower damage resulting in lower healing, but still managed to make me go back from low health to full health in a flash. So I might revisit to see how this thing performs with a good gun. Simply put, it's a fantastic choice for those who are willing to give up their damage for some utility. For the final part of the set, we have the Holy Mackerel, which is just a funnier stock reskin. It does get a bit of utility in this set in particular due to the slow reload and the lack of a damaging secondary, but there are still better options. Still doesn't make up for the overall lack of damage of this set, which becomes really painful when going against overhealed targets. That's something I should have mentioned earlier. Scout in general struggles when fighting pocketed targets. You're much better off trying to go for a medic pick. Unless you've got perfect aim, the medic can make sure the enemy lives long enough to kill you. However, something you can do against an overhealed target to make sure that someone will die is mark them for death, which is where a second melee I tried in the cycle comes in, the Fan of War. This one would be normally almost pointless, but since the Shortstop does less overall damage than other scatter guns, I thought it was worth a shot. I'll admit, there were moments where it shined, like when you need to get rid of a pocketed heavy, but most of the time, this thing was once again nearly pointless. Again, why mark someone for death when you just kill them? However, my streak of using bad weapons would end soon, as my load would be elevated from mediocre to downright oppressive. The number one fan is easily the Scout's strongest weapon set, as we're given 2 solid options and 1 amazing primary in the form of the Soda Popper. It has a fire rate and clip size of the Force of Nature, but has no damage changes, no knockback, and a faster reload, making it a much more consistent option. If this was the end of the changes to the weapon, it would be a pretty solid choice. However, it comes with one final powerful bonus, the height meter. This meter gets filled up by doing damage, and once you deal 300 damage, you gain access to one of the strongest buffs in the game. 5 jumps. Scout's already a tricky target to track down with 2 jumps. When you give him 5, he's nearly impossible to track. Soldiers can't do anything to you. Any attempt for heavy trying to track you resembles more of a seizure than aiming. And getting headshot seems like an impossibility. The keyword seems, they'll still get you sometimes. The meter also usually comes back fast if you're active, meaning you're able to create a cycle of death where you kill some people, pop the height meter to save yourself, go back in for more, save yourself with 5 jumps, and repeat. Overall, you'll do an insane burst damage, your DPS is still pretty good due to super fast reload speed, you have incredible mobility if you've done enough damage. Oh yeah, I also ended up breaking my record for kills in a single life with this weapon too. This might be better than a stock scattergun, but enough gushing, we need to look at the rest of the set. The Winger is a pretty good secondary, although it suffers a bit because it's paired with the rest of the Scout's secondary lineup and therefore seems less appealing. It's a pistol that does a bit more damage but has magazine size reduced by 7 bullets. It allows the Scout to jump higher. It's a nice utility that gives the Scout more mobility while still having some good damage. It also pairs well with the Soda Popper in general, as not only does the 5 jump stack with a jump height boost from the Winger, but a mate shot from the Soda Popper comes well into a single Winger shot to kill a light class. It's solid, but unfortunately outclassed. What isn't a weapon that's outclassed as easily is the Atomizer, which grants Scout a triple jump. He also does airborne mini crits, I guess, but nobody cares. There's also a damage penalty and a long deploy speed too, but again, it's gotta have some balancing somehow. You can't just get a triple jump for free, but pulling this thing out at the right moments can get you some crazy airtime. Generally, I use the Winger for faster vertical traversal and the Atomizer for long jumps. Overall, this slot was amazing, as it should have been some of the most fun I had with the challenge. However, there's one problem. Fatigue is starting to set in. As it turns out, playing the same game in the same way for a month is going to get tiring at some point. It's not too bad yet, but I managed to dampen what should have been one of those fun loads of the challenge. Thankfully, we're going to be following up this disappointment with a load that's not necessarily the most viable, but certainly a good time. The Babyface's Blaster is similar to the Soda Popper in that it's a mobility-focused weapon, but instead of focusing on bursts of vertical mobility, it focuses on constantly boosting your running speed. Deal damage and you get faster, with the maximum speed being 40% faster than your typical Scout, and only needing a mere 100 damage to acquire it, which is a single meat shot. But numbers don't really do this weapon justice, as a sheer speed allows it to be incredibly difficult to hit and easily rotate across the map. However, its incredible power comes at many costs. For one, you have 2 less shots in a clip. This is fine, as many scatterguns have this downside, it's not too much of an issue. Next, double jumping takes away some of your boost. Again, another downside that isn't too hard to deal with. Not to mention, double jumping while at full boost isn't a completely stupid move, as not only do you get an incredibly fast change of direction mid-air, but you could potentially regain the boost you lost by shooting the opponent before landing, which is super useful against soldiers and heavies. But we're not done with the downsides, as you also start out slower than the average Scout, with a movement speed of 120% compared to the typical 133%. Once again, this is manageable. It's only natural to start out weaker with a weapon of this potential to snowball. However, the final downside is the one that drives most people away from this weapon, losing boost when taking damage. It's not even a huge amount, all it takes is 25 damage to lose it all. This makes certain matchups hard to deal with, like Pyros and Engineers, and generally makes closed-in maps more dangerous. The general playstyle you want to take with this weapon is one of selective aggression, as if you pick the wrong battle, it's over for you. Overall, this weapon is pretty decent and can get some results, but isn't quite as viable as the upper 3 scatterguns, at least in the shortstop though. However, the real highlight of the loadout is the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol. This weapon is simply great. We can use it to quickly restore chip damage, mag dump enemies at close range to secure a kill, and still deal a good amount of damage to sentries. The 3 less shots is barely a downside, and can be potentially considered a straight upgrade to stock. Nothing else to say, it's great. Now let's go from the cream of the crop to the bottom of the barrel, because during days 13 and 14, I used the sun on a stick. Now this level view, it's not good, not even funny, it's just bad. You'll often forget this thing exists, and the number of times its sun on a stick has genuinely helped me out can be counted on one hand. It's a terrible weapon, but hey, at least it doesn't actively harm you like the Sandman. Oh hey, speaking of weapons that actively harm you, I also tried out the Candy Cane. 2 simple stats of 2 extremes. Every kill gets you a small health pack, but you also take 25% more damage for explosives. Most of the time, this weapon isn't worth it though, as getting a nice cleanup after a kill isn't really worth getting deleted by explosive classes outright. However, I found it surprisingly useful with the Babyface's blaster, as the extreme speed of the weapon allows you to comfortably dodge explosives. Plus the health packs on kills soften the blow of the pyro matchup, as you can go back to regaining boost without that pesky afterburn. Then again, it can still feel like a massive hindrance if the enemy explosive classes can aim well. In conclusion, the Candy Cane isn't as bad as Sandman because at least you get something really good in return for volatility, but it's still not a viable option in most circumstances. And that's every melee weapon and secondary covered for Scout. It's halfway through this challenge now, so after I get done with one last primary, it's time to get experimental with loadouts. Unfortunately, the next primary weapon just isn't good. If there's one Scout weapon that's universally agreed to be bad, it's the Scatterer. It's a simple weapon. You get mini crits when... There's no way to say this without sounding gay, but I'll try. You get mini crits when attacking the opponent while they can't see you, while trading away some accuracy and 2 less shots in the mag. Oh yeah, also no random crits. It's a weapon that sounds okay on paper, until you realize you're trading 2 shots in mid-range damage for occasionally one-shotting enemies who didn't pray today, which is more often than not snipers that would have already died. Sometimes you get some extra damage in these scenarios, but that's the extent of how useful this weapon is. So yeah, it's bad. However, it's still more fun to use than a shortstop, because as long as the gun can deal 105 damage or more, I'm still going to use it. As for the rest of my loadout for the next 3 days, I have the Winger and the Atomizer for additional flanking potential. So that's it for weapons. Anything else notable happened in these days? Well, yeah. I wanted a method to countering sentry guns. I don't know what this is named, but it's a maneuver that involves getting very close to a sentry gun, then abusing the slow tracking speed of the sentry and just make it spin circles while you take shots at it. If the sentry's in a more open area, you can just run around it, but the more consistent yet tricky way to take it down is to jump on it and slowly crouch walk in a circle. It's a bit tricky to get in, but once you've got it, you can easily take down your greatest counter. As for tips of pricing this, if you see a sentry you think you get close enough to go for it. Putting yourself in a situation where you need this technique as much as possible is the best way to improve. With that all out of the way, I've now properly used every scout weapon, so now I can move on to more experimental loadouts. Well, kinda experimental. Whatever, let's get it. To start with these new days of experimenting with loadouts, I decided to look for which weapons would work best with the stock scout gun. To start with the basics, of course. First load I decided to go with was the Mad Milk and Atomizer, which was mainly because I wanted to use the Mad Milk with a better weapon. And yep, it's pretty strong. Saved me a ton of times, it was really useful in situations I normally couldn't help. If there's an enemy you can't kill or a crowd you can't kill, just throw it and run away. However, I have one main problem with it. It's not a gun. Turns out that having another weapon after you beef some scattergun shots is insanely useful. You just couldn't go without it. On the other hand, with the Atomizer, I found it even better than when I first used it, because as it turns out, having this much freedom to go anywhere is one of the best things you can give to an already highly mobile threat. I'll keep this weapon for testing later. Now on to the next loadout is an alternate version of my first loadout. It has the Boston Basher and the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol. At first, I was thinking I was in with a straight upgrade compared to my typical loadout. However, it turns out those 3 bullets really matter. A lot of times you won't have the damage to finish off the enemy and need to reload again, which can make all the difference in a life or death situation. I'd say the Pretty Boy's pocket pistol is better in close range where you get the most value out of that fast fire rate, but I'd still say the pistol is better for the job you typically use the pistol for, finishing off enemies and getting mid-range chip damage. Moving on to the Boston Basher, it was still good as I remembered, but I feel like I could have gotten more value out of the melee slot, which leads to my last loadout for the cycle. I opted to go back to the atomizer and stock pistol, which proved to be a just much more effective version of my previous build. The pistol was generally more consistent and useful, the atomizer generally served me better, and overall, this is probably going to be my default scout loadout going forward. One more thing to know about this cycle is I started experimenting more with the purposely shorter jump to draw off my opponent's aim. As I usually has to keep up with the scout change direction with his double jump, you can jump in place to make the enemy overshoot. Feels a bit silly I'm discovering and implementing this after how many hours I have on scout, but hey, better late than never. But we've talked about this segment for long enough. Let's go back to the soda popper for a bit. To start the soda popper journey, I try to gimmick your loadout with the bonk and the atomizer. The idea of this loadout is to go deep in enemy territory that have a guaranteed escape with the soda popper's 5 jumps or the bonk's invincibility. However, there's 2 main pros I had running this. The first being that this playstyle is only suited for certain maps. On more linear maps with good flank routes, this playstyle functions properly. However, on more open maps or maps relying on choke points, you either don't need the bonk, or you'll never get a chance to get into a position where it will be useful. The second problem is me. Wherever how this playstyle is just something I don't typically go for. When I play Scout, I usually go for picks and only go for super aggressive plays when I feel the trade is worth it, or the enemy team is scared enough, meaning that I'm not one for going super deep into enemy lines. It's a fine look, but just not one I'm going to go for often. However, my next load was one that fit better with how I typically play, as I opted to go with 2 blade weapons. The rationale behind this load choice was similar to how the Bayface's blaster scouts used these as ability or boost, so I used the same principle for the height meter. And it's still really fun, because being a highly mobile threat that can deal high burst damage with projectiles will never not be boring. However, my main problem with the load most of the time was when I tried to finish off an enemy that was low health for my soda popper. Usually the damage of these projectiles would be overkill, and if you missed, you just had to deal with a long cooldown. It's a fun place I'll probably go back to after this challenge is done, but it's nowhere near the full potential of the soda popper. With that in mind, I decided to go back to the secondaries that I've already deemed optimal as a stock scattergun, that being the pistol and the atomizer. Not much to say about these 2 ones I haven't already said, but something noticeable was my performance with the soda popper compared to the stock scattergun. While there were a lot of modes where the burst damage really shined, generally, I prefer the consistency of the scattergun. More shots that meant I could be in longer and bigger fights. The high mirror doesn't mean too much if the entire enemy team will laser you down. In conclusion, the soda popper isn't exactly the direct upgrade that people say it is. Whatever. Enough of these basic meta weapons. Let's mess around with the funnier primaries. The first load I decided to go with was the Force of Nature, the Winker, and the Rap Assassin. It's a more mobility focused load, with some extra damage on the side to finish off opponents if the initial burst didn't do the job. However, there was still a problem of overshooting a kill, which wasn't as bad before since the pistol reloads faster than a guillotine, but at the end of the day, I'd still rather have the stock pistol. The Winker still had its moments though, as I managed to get a bunch of fun ambushes that were only possible to increase mobility this loadout had. However, I had run into a problem that was a natural consequence of the context of my playstyle. I was playing too much for content and kill streaks. I would tend to only go for kills that I thought were guaranteed and not go for risky trades, which is pretty detrimental to the scout playstyle. A scout is a class that's all about going in and not really caring if you die, if it means that you don't have Uber. But this challenge encouraged going for a safe place over and make it into a video. So I dropped the playstyle of staying back and explicitly going for kill streaks, and I ended up having a lot more fun, getting a lot higher KDs, and still ended up getting the clips I wanted. It really goes to show that sometimes tryharding will ironically make you play worse. So that's a mental roadblock overcome. What other stupid stuff did I run in this cycle? Well, I went back to the baby phase blaster, with a standardized load of the cleaver and the rap assassin rather than the gimmicky one I used earlier with the candy cane. Out of the 3 weapons I used with the double projectile loadout combo, the babyface's blaster has the best synergy, due to the fact you can regain boost even when you're out of line of sight of an enemy because of bleed. Additionally, you get more range on a weapon that desperately needs a way to attack from further away, further solidifying the popularity of this weapon combination. However, I still like the healing based load that I made a bit more, because aggression and healing on kills will always be a blast. Finally, I decided to go back to a crackerhead idea I had before: Support Scout. The melee and secondary choices are pretty obvious, as a fan of war debuffs enemy, and the Mad Milk reveals spies, can heal teammates, and save teams from burning alive. As for the primary, I opted to go for the Force of Nature, as knocking certain enemies away could save my teammates. With all this, you tend to take more time helping out a team with debuffs and saves rather than purely getting kills. Granted, you can still frag out, but that's something that shares the stage with semi-support capabilities. But is this load even a good idea? Well, kind of. Sure, it's not as optimal as regular scout, but it's a nice way to shake up the normal gameplay loop of going around and just killing people. Besides, why would you want to be optimal all the time? It's a casual mode. However, we're also now in the final stretch of the challenge, and I need to test if I improved or not over this last month. With that, I'm going back to basics. For my final loadout of the standard scattergun and pistol, and opted to go for the atomizer since it was my favorite melee at this point, as mobility was often too good to pass up. I don't really have any other insights on this loadout, because from this point I was trying to gauge if I improved Red Scout from doing this challenge. One game of Con King where I managed to break my old kill streak record by getting 16 kills in a single life, and an answer was pretty clear. This challenge was worth it. As for looking back on the clips from the first day and comparing them to the final days, and you can see my aim is a lot more consistent and my movement is generally better. I thought there wasn't really much room for improvement at the start, but I guess I was wrong. There was also the whole sentry strafing technique I've picked up, which I'm still not completely consistent with, but the fact that I was able to get it down a good number of times during the challenge was impressive enough. But the biggest takeaway from the challenge I got wasn't some inherent knowledge of the scout class or a skill I got along the way, but rather a greater appreciation for TF2 in the scout class as a whole. The fact that I played the same class for the length of a month and still get enjoyment out of it speaks to how well each class is designed in gameplay. You can't really get it out of any other modern character-based PvP game. If you look at a similar challenge of playing a character over a long period of time for Valorant or Overwatch, they usually go for about 10 hours or a week, but in TF2 it's possible to still garner deeper knowledge about a class for 100 days. Thankfully I didn't go that far, but I still increased my playtime on Scout for around 130 hours to 174 hours, meaning I played for about 40 hours total. But enough stalling, let's wrap this up. Overall, I had a very positive experience from this challenge. It was really nice playing a class for an extended period of time, and sure, while there were plenty of moments where I wished I could swap off, especially when my teammates seemed to be unable to destroy Sentry, there was also a ton of moments I managed to show why the Scout is considered such a powerful class. I also managed to get from our Scout's full kit and found out which weapons worked for me, which was it. Speaking of which, here's a tier list. And hey, even if this video doesn't succeed, I'm still probably going to do another 30 days challenge simply for the fun of it. Thanks for sticking by, but join us at the end eventually. I'll see you in the next one.